Alright, let's face it, it's incredibly difficult to get a high quality finish in our typical workshop environments, basements, garages, and even driveways. But fortunately, there's something you could do to just about every finish after the finish cures to make it absolutely flawless. Now you could build it up to a super high gloss, kind of like this little sample board I've got here, or you could stop at a satin semi-gloss somewhere along the way. The process is called rubbing out, and I'll wait. Now, if you don't get that joke, congratulations, your mind is pure. Now, rubbing out the finish is really nothing more than using abrasives to work the cured finish. Now, what's great about this for small shop woodworkers is the fact that that final coat is almost never perfect, and a process like this allows us to smooth the surface and then bring it up to the desired sheen, whatever that may be. And as you can see, I've got a piece of plywood here that's been brought up to a nice high gloss. Now, before you get started with this process, you have to look at the wood you're working with and determine if you need to fill the pores. Certain woods have open pores and open grain, and you will need to use a pore filler to get a nice, smooth, continuous surface that you could build your finish upon. That's how we're going to start this project. Now, this project itself is a humidor that we're building in the Wood Whisperer Guild at thewoodwhispererguild.com. If you want more information on that, that's where you can go. And we're using Bubinga and Wengi. Both of those woods need to be filled because they have open pores and open grain, so let's get to it. The surface is sanded to 320 grit, and then a sealer coat of either lacquer or shellac is applied. This sealer coat will help protect the wood surface from the colored wood filler. Once dry, the finish is lightly sanded with 320 grit paper. I'm using Timbermate wood filler in ebony for the Wengi trim. A putty knife gives me the control that I need for this tedious work. Well, this might take a little while. I'm using Brazilian cherry filler for the Bubinga, and a small piece of scrap wood helps me drive the putty into the pores without scratching the surface. I let the filler sit overnight and then sand the surface lightly with 320 grit paper. The remainder of the filler is removed with a damp rag. They might be hard to see, but the filled pores give us a smooth and continuous surface on which to layer our lacquer finish. The lacquer I'm using is from Sherwin-Williams. I always filter my finishes before spraying using a simple paint filter. I apply 3 coats to the box, let it dry for a day, and then give the surface a light sanding with 320 grit. I apply about 7 more coats over the course of the next 2 days. Now I've applied a total of about 10 coats to the box, and that's way more finish than I normally would put on a project, but most projects don't get the rubbing out process that we're going to do on this one. Now to rub out the finish, you could rub out to any sheen, whatever you want, but we're going for a high gloss here, and that process itself uses abrasives, so it's going to remove some of the finish. This is why we put a whole bunch of extra finish on the surface to make sure that we have a thicker film that can sustain that extra abrasion. So when it's all said and done, there's still enough finish on the surface to protect the project, but we've done all the buffing that we needed to do to get that high shine. All right, now we can't do this process right away because we need to make sure that the material is up to its full hardness. It has to be completely cured or close to it. Now something like a lacquer, fortunately, only takes about a week to get there. If you're doing some sort of an oil-based finish, that may take 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The longer you wait, the better. All right, so we're going to give this at least 7 days before we start that rub-out process. To level the surface, I'm using 320 grit wet-dry paper. Soapy water serves to lubricate the sandpaper and prevents clogging. As you sand, you should see a milky slurry develop. That's the finish dust mixing with the soapy water, and it's perfectly normal. But if it persists for several days, you should see a doctor. To check your progress, wipe away the slurry and examine the surface. You see all those shiny spots? Those are actually the low points. We need to keep sanding until the entire surface is uniformly dull. When you're finished, it should look something like this. Any remaining low spots can be hit with a little bit of extra sanding. The corners and edges are leveled by hand just to be safe. To smooth the surface, I'm going to use platine abrasive pads from Festool, including 500, 1000, and 2000 grit. These pads attach to any random orbit sander, and they make quick work of the smoothing process. A little soapy water lubricates the surface and the slurry quickly develops. I start with 500 grit and then repeat the process with 1000 grit and finally 2000 grit. After 2000 grit, we've got a beautiful satin finish. Now some people may prefer this sheen, so there's nothing wrong with stopping at this point if you wanted to. But we're going to take this finish a step further with polishing. To polish the surface, I'm using Manzurna polishing compounds. The IP2000 will erase the 2000 grit scratches, and the SF4500 will give us that final deep gloss we're going for. To apply the polish, I'm using SureBuff pads that attach right to my sander. I'll start with the IP2000, putting a few dabs right on the polishing pad. The weight of the sander really does all of the work here. All I have to do is guide it. The polish is then removed, and we can start with the SF4500. Using a soft cloth and some of that soapy water, I can clean the remaining polish off the surface. While a high gloss finish like this isn't really appropriate for most home projects, it sure is fun on the occasional box or that showpiece project. And the principles behind it can be used to improve just about any finish that you apply in your shop. If you can say it without giggling, rubbing out is a great way to achieve a perfect finish.